Hi folks, my name is Trainmaster04 and today I will be reviewing this beautiful Southern Pacific GS2 type steam locomotive from Lionel Trains with the TMCC control system.
Union Pacific 4014, do you read me? Over. Roger that. Union Pacific 4014, I read you. Over. Start up and stand by. Over. Yes, sir. Start up and stand by.
Let's start off with a little bit of history about the prototype GS2 class steam locomotive. The GS2 classes were a series of 484s, which means there are 4 wheels in the front, 8 driving wheels, and 4 trailing wheels. The GS2s themselves were built by the Lima Locomotive Works in 1937 and were retired in 1956. In total, Lima Locomotive Works were hired to build 5 of these beautiful locomotives for the Southern Pacific Railroad. These locomotives were painted in this paint scheme, which is called the Daylight Paint Scheme, in order to pull Southern Pacific's fast, luxurious, and beautiful daylight limited passenger trains. The prototype themselves were able to get up to a maximum speed of 90 miles per hour and rode on 73.5-inch drivers. That's the reason why it was able to get up to 90 miles per hour. Its predecessors, the GS1s, were a little bit smaller, but still had this same type of style of locomotive, which means it had the single headlight, streamlined nose, as well as this semi-streamlined pilot and semi-streamlined skirting on the top. Now let's talk about the Lionel rendition of the Southern Pacific GS2. This locomotive was recently cataloged in the 2004 Volume 2 catalog and was produced with the TMCC control system on board. For the sound system, it sports the Railsounds 5.0 system. To run this locomotive, you have to have a minimum curve radius of 0.54 in order for this locomotive to work properly. To control it, you can either use your Cab 2 remote control programmed in TMCC mode, your traditional Cab 1 remote control, or even conventional mode with a transformer and some track. Now let's take a closer look at the finer die-cast metal details and separately applied parts on this locomotive. Starting at the front of the locomotive where the smoke box and smokestack is located, at first we can see a ribbed pilot. Now take note that these are actually separately applied metal pieces. Right above it you have brake hose detailing right here that are separately applied, a coupler cut bar that actually works, and also a chain that goes into the scale dummy coupler. Now let me take a second and explain when I mean a scale dummy coupler. Traditionally on freight cars and the couplers on locomotives, they are a little bit bigger than technically they should, or when they should be. That's where the scale couplers come in. Now, let me explain what I mean about scale. Scale is the prototypical size of the real thing being downscaled to fit this type of size, in this case, O-gauge trains. Looking above the pilot, we can see this nice little deck right here with a legible number board right underneath it. And behind the platform, if you can see, there's a separately applied bell. Above the platform, we have a grab iron right here, and above the grab iron, we have the smoke box door. Above the smoke box door, we have this little piece right here. Now, something specific on Southern Pacific locomotives and some Western Pacific locomotives is they were equipped with what was called a Typhoon Air Horn. Now, these locomotives were primarily run on the East Coast, which means that there would be fog problems, And interesting fact, whistles were not able to be heard through the dense fog because of the density of the water molecules in the air, otherwise known as fog. To combat with that, Southern Pacific engineers figured out that they could add an air horn, which was able to penetrate through the dense fog much easier, and was also, in result, much safer for everybody around the locomotive. Moving up from the smoke box door, we now have a front view of two marker lights. Now, these marker lights do illuminate when the locomotive is on, as well as the headlight in the front. Now, here's a bit of a railroad trivia knowledge, I guess you could say. Marker lights were primarily used in order to tell people, or to tell crew members that are off the train, if the train itself has another part to it, is a special, which means it's not scheduled, or they can be off, which means that this train is the only train for this type. Moving down on the engineer side of the locomotive, we are first greeted by this beautiful side streamlining and that is decorated in a nice, beautiful orange paint scheme with a touch of silver right there, as well as the Daylight logo, which again is this locomotive primarily ran for the Southern Pacific Daylight Limited passenger train. Above that, we have a nice, beautiful walkway, and above the walkway, we have 3 legible builders plate. Right here, we have a nice little grab iron, and even above that, we have a grab iron that runs along the entire side of the locomotive. Getting a better view on the side of this locomotive, we can further see this illuminated marker boards, which I will show which will turn on when the locomotive has gets power from the track. Looking down the boiler, we have a outside throttle linkage, which is prototypical to this type of locomotive. A feed water system right here, detail for that. A nice little step, a little hatch right here, which does not open, and the beginning of the cab, which I will look further into in a second. Moving on down from the top side of the boiler, we can see that we can now get a better look at the side rods as well as the piston, which is here, the leading trucks, the 8 drive wheels, and all the detail around it. So starting at the front, we have 4 nicely striped leading trucks, a piston above, which has nice die-cast detailing, the side rods that are connected to the piston, the 8 drive wheels, which again are nicely white-walled, and the side rods connect to the driving wheels. Looking at the firebox and cab area, as you can see, there are nicely applied, separately applied pipework around the firebox, as well as some nice details on the firebox itself. On the cab, we have a nice legible 4410, which marks the number for this type of locomotive. Some more legible lettering underneath the numbering, and a nice little grab iron right here. Looking farther down underneath the firebox, we can now see the trailing trucks on this locomotive. Now, this locomotive, since it being a Southern Pacific locomotive, Lionel did a good job on putting special pieces that were unique to Southern Pacific locomotives. For example, this piece right here. This piece, I highly believe, is used to deflect the blow-off steam when an engineer or fireman blows down on their steam locomotives. Looking on top of the locomotive itself, the first thing we can see is the smokestack. Now on this model, it has what's called a smoke unit. Now a smoke unit, it is a little chamber that has basically a little cotton ball in the bottom of it, and it is soaked with what is called smoke fluid. When you put smoke fluid in it, the chamber is heated up by a little coil and smoke comes out of it, but it is also forced by a little fan motor. When the locomotive is in motion and the locomotive sounds create the chuff, every time it chuffs, a puff of smoke comes out simultaneously to the sounds of the chuffing noise. Past the locomotive's smokestack, we can further see this streamlining on the top of this locomotive. Now, because of the streamlining, there is not a lot you can look at, but there are some details we can still see. For example, there's this little cover hatch. Behind it, a steam dome, which the steam dome, its function is where the steam from the boiler collects into one spot to then be directed down into the pistons. Behind the steam dome, we have this little open area which contains two hand-painted pop-off valves. Behind the pop-off valves, we have a nice separately applied hand-painted whistle. Behind the whistle, we have a nice steam dynamo generator. Around the generator, we have some cast-in details, and on top of the cab, we have an opening roof hatch. Getting a better view of the cab, we have a crew figure inside with also if I could get it moved, also a sliding window, which the same thing can be said for the other side. On top of the roof, we have nice rivet detailing on top, and again, here is that nice little hatch that can be opened and closed. Looking on the fireman's side of the locomotive, we again see most of the same similar detailing, with a little bit of variations. For example, this nice little hand-painted valve, and one less builder's plate. But besides that, the fireman's side is more or less the same compared to the engineer's side. Looking at the back side of the locomotive, where the cab is located, we are first greeted with two white or silver painted handrails at both sides of the locomotive. Inside the cab, we have a nicely detailed back head with some hand-painted knobs and gauges inside. On both sides of the cab, we have two nicely made lensed windows. And at the bottom, we have the rear end of the trailing truck, which also holds the infrared sensor, which connects the tender to the locomotive, and they can communicate with each other. Looking at the underside of the locomotive, we can further get a better look at what the locomotive looks like on the underside. At the start, we can see the leading truck wheels and how they are assembled, the 8 driving wheels, and as well as the trailing trucks. Underneath, we are also greeted with 2 pickup rollers for electrical connection with the center rail, 2 traction tires on the rear driving wheels of the locomotive, as well, and also the 4 wheels of the trailing truck. Now, also, one nice look at the trailing truck is that we could also get a better look at how the wheels are white-walled. Looking at the front of the tender, we are first greeted with the infrared drawbar on the tender, 2 separately applied ladders on both sides of the tender. Above, on the tender platform, we have separately applied and molded in detail parts. For example, this nice little box, this one, and also some separately applied hoses. Looking on the side of the tender, we still have that gorgeous Southern Pacific Daylight paint scheme, and also legibly written Southern Pacific lines font on the side of the tender. Looking on top of the tender, we again can see both molded in and separately applied detailing. For example, hatches, more toolboxes, and so forth. And as well on the tender, we can see 4 separately applied water hatches to the tender. which all of them open up. Inside these hatches, the first one is empty. The second one has a sound on and off switch. And in the third one, there is the volume control knob for the tender. And in the final one, there is nothing. Now, something you may be wondering is, why is there no cold on this tender? The reason being is because the Southern Pacific Railroad had most of their locomotives be oil burners. This is because coal was not readily available for them to use and where their lines ran, but oil was. So forth, this tender has a oil bunker, and this little hatch right here is the hatch to fill the oil bunker in this tender. Looking at the back of the tender, we can first see the electro coupler. Now, an electro coupler is basically an automatic coupler that uses an electromagnet to throw it by remote control. Now, you can throw this electro coupler through your Cab 1 or Cab 2 remote control, but take note you cannot do this in conventional mode, since the conventional mode does not give you the full-fledged features on this locomotive. Above that, we have a nice little platform with a coupling cup bar that is separately applied. On both sides of it, we have nice silver painted ladders. Above that, we have some more molded in riveting detail, a molded in handrail, both sides, more grab irons, 2 new silver grab irons, marker lights, a ladder, as well as a backup light that turns on when you put the locomotive in reverse. Looking at the underside of the tender, we again see 2 pickup rollers for good solid connection to the track, 2 three-wheel set trucks, and the wheels on both sides do have white walls on them. In the middle, we can see the one large Fat Boy speaker, which produces the sounds for this locomotive, and above that, a nice little brake detail. Now that we've covered the locomotive and tender detailing, as well as what it looks like on the underside of both the locomotive and tender, it is now time to start up this locomotive. Starting up the locomotive, we first get the side of the front headlight turning on, the 2 number boards on both sides of the headlight, the marker lights, as well as both of the number boards on both sides of the locomotive. Also, the sounds immediately turn on, and we now get the sound of the locomotive actually ready for service. As stated earlier, this locomotive is equipped with TMCC control system as well as Railsounds 5.0. This means that this locomotive is able to do 2 chuffs per revolution, which I'll explain later, and also has the ability to have crew talk sounds, tower comm sounds, and as well as randomized quillable whistle. Here's the whistle, for example. Next, we have the water injector. And also, since this locomotive has a horn, instead of getting a blowdown sound, instead you get a horn. Next comes the crew talk and tower comm. Now, I do know from other people doing video product reviews that not a lot of you actually like these kind of noises, or not these noises, but these kind of features. But in my preference, I'm okay with it, and also there's others out there that would like to hear them. So here's the crew chatter.
This is 4410, position here waiting for your light, sir. Over. SP 4410, you are cleared outbound. Take a read. Over. 4410, copy that. Just about all buttoned up here. We'll be rolling in a second, sir. Over.
Tower comm.
SP 4410, you are cleared outbound. You may proceed. Over. Dispatch, this is 4410. Roger that. Just about all buttoned up here. We'll be rolling in a second, sir. Over.
Finally, this locomotive has the ability to have bell sounds as well. Finally, before we get this locomotive moving, I'm going to show you the Electro Coupler when it is activated. Looking back at the back of the tender, we can now see the two rear marker lights illuminated, as well as the reversing light, which can be activated when you reverse the locomotive. For example, comes on when in reverse, turns off when you put it in forward. Now for the Electro Coupler. To activate the Electro Coupler, you have to press the rear coupler button on either your Cab 1 or Cab 2 remote control. For example, that is what the Electro Coupler looks like when activated, and now you are able to back up onto a train, couple up, and move on out. Now that you know what kind of sound features are offered in this locomotive, let's now have some fun by coupling up some cars and running this locomotive around the layout. Today, I won't be running a daylight passenger train with this locomotive due to that I do not have any daylight paint scheme passenger cars in my personal collection. So today I'll be just running a reefer consist, and to pull this locomotive is equipped with one large flywheel motor, and it actually performs very well. So without further ado, here's my Lionel TMCC GS2 steam locomotive running around my layout.
SP4410, you may proceed. Over. Dispatch, this is 4410. Ready to go. Over. This is 4410. We're underway at this time. Over. Dispatch, this is 4410.
Well, it's about time for me to end this video and say goodbye. But before I do, let me answer the questions on how do you find one of these locomotives, what are the prices, and also how do I feel about this locomotive. Well, to start off, back in 2004, Lionel priced this locomotive right at $1,200. But over the years, it has dropped down in price. Recently, it has been evaluated to be at $980 in mint condition. Now, you can probably find one of these either at your local hobby shop, even if they have one in their storage, or you could probably get one of these off of eBay for a reasonable price. Finally, what do I think about this locomotive? Well, I love this locomotive, in short. It's got a wonderful paint scheme, it's got a great smoke unit, a great whistle, and it also performs very well. And also, if you want to learn some more information about the daylight, as well as some more information on the famous SP4449, otherwise known as the daylight, I will leave a link in the description of a 1990s video off of YouTube, which is not mine, just to let you know. And it discusses about some of the history about the daylight train itself, as well as shows some footage of the 4449 running down the track from Oregon into California. Now, don't forget to click subscribe so that you won't miss another video that I make in the near future. Also, press that like button if you actually enjoyed this video, and finally, leave a comment if you want to. And if you do, please give me some suggestions on what you would like to see in future videos in the section of model trains. My name is Trainmaster04, and thanks for watching.